ravioli.
Macaroni. What?
Was that macaroni or Michaelides? But like the time. Macaroni.
It was macaroni.
Macaroni.
Maracos.
Oh, dear Lord. Welcome back to Many Pages Later, the podcast where we talk about books. I'm Josh, and right there is my favorite human, Haley. This week, we're doing a little bit of a special episode. We are talking on a Many Pages Later.
Many pages later.
You see what we did there?
That was half the reason why we chose the name that we did for this podcast, so that we could use both versions of the word mini and mini.
Exactly. So this one is an M-I-N-I pages later.
Yeah.
Before we get into the subject of this episode, where we talk about some of our favorite books of all time, really quickly, the housekeeping item of the day is, if you're listening to the show, leave a rating and review wherever you're listening. It's the best way for the podcast to show up in other people's feeds, because
which would be really cool.
it would be great, because Apple and Spotify see that there are ratings and reviews left on a show, and they go, oh, we should give this to more people so that they can discover it.
Yeah, I really didn't know the power that leaving a rating held until you informed me of it. And now I have gone since then and like left ratings on every podcast I've ever listened to.
It is the number one way for new podcasts to be promoted within a podcast platform.
Yeah, so that's just something, if you got 2 seconds, it would just be really nice of you to do.
Now, let's hop into some of our favorite books of all time.
Woohoo!
I don't know if we have like specified a number.
No.
If it's 3-ish.
3-ish sounds good.
Okay. We're going to do each of our three-ish of our favorite books of all time.
And without spoiling them. So
Yes.
this episode is cool to listen to, even if you don't even read at all, or if you haven't read these specific books, that's okay.
Or if you're just trying to find a new read,
Yeah.
you'll probably like one of these.
But we're not going to spoiler content.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to get us started off?
You want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay. First book, full transparency, I did have to think very, very long and hard about which one this was going to be. But we have this book here, The Wisdom of Crowds by Joe Abercrombie. It is the third book in his Age of Madness trilogy.
Okay.
It is fantasy. It is grimdark fantasy. So potentially not for the faint of heart.
Not for me.
It's a story. It's the conclusion of, obviously, a trilogy, but it's really also the conclusion of a previous trilogy.
Oh.
Abercrombie got famous for writing a trilogy called The First Law,
Okay.
which is a pretty big deal in fantasy reading circles. This is a second trilogy that he just finished a couple of years ago, and it sort of is a sequel trilogy to the first one. And it deals with a lot of similar themes that are left over from the first one, and a lot of similar characters that are left over from the first one.
Okay. Cool.
Super, super good. It's the reason it's here is because the ending of this book is one of the better endings to a fantasy book I've ever read. It does that perfect little thing with an ending where it takes all the information you already know and adds an extra little thing on top that changes everything. So it was a whoa kind of moment when I got to the end of this book.
Cool.
So it's
Nice.
really, really good. So I definitely, when people are trying to get into fantasy, I definitely tell them to start with Abercrombie, but with the caveat that it is absolutely in the grimdark vein. So, but it's very funny. There's a lot of great character work.
That's nice.
And yeah, it's a fun
So
time.
is he the CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch?
No.
Imagine if
He's just a British
all
guy.
of the clothes would have like embroidery of like a really grim line.
Yeah.
Like a line from his novel would just be like on the shirt. Nice.
That would be something.
Yeah.
So yeah, my number one.
Your
Elizabeth
number one?
Crowds.
Okay. Am I doing my number one now?
Yeah.
Okay, my number one favorite book of all time has to be a classic, Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I love Little Women. There is just like something about a good classic, like Jane Austen or the Bronte sisters or Louisa May Alcott. It's just, I mean, obviously I heavily appreciate modern writing, modern literature. I love it. It's much easier to read, much more relatable in
Yeah.
a lot of ways, but just the beauty in the language of classics, I feel like is just unparalleled. And I just love the story of Little Women, and like we both love the movie. And I feel like definitely during Christmas time, it's like one of my first movies I want to watch.
Yeah.
It's just a story of a family and sisterhood and love and heartache. It just nothing can compare to Little Women. Like it will always be my top.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like a warm, like cozy, makes your heart feel good book.
It's like one of the classic American novels, I feel like. That
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
one and
Moby Dick.
oh gosh.
I liked Moby Dick. See, I do like classics. I'm a nerd.
Well, that's okay. You know, everybody can like what they like.
Okay, well, point of the story is Little Women, my number one favorite book of all time. What's your number two book?
Well, also, I don't think these are
Or they're not in order?
Yeah,
Okay,
probably
good.
not.
That's very relieving because mine are not in a specific order other than Little Women
Little Women's your favorite.
of all time.
It's most favorite. And then these other are
I
slightly
like,
less
yeah, exactly.
favorite.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. My number two, but also not in any specific order, is The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch, another fantasy book. Why do I love this so much? I love this book so much.
You talk about this book all the time.
All the time. It's so good. The reading experience, reading Lies of Locke Lamora, was just so much fun. I think, here's what it was. This book was perfectly to my taste and what I enjoy reading. It was just the perfect book for me. This was all the elements that I really love in a book. It's got really inventive, witty humor. It's got, I think, situations that characters have to be intelligent to get out of,
Okay.
which, I mean, I'm thinking of one specific scene or set of scenes where Locke Lamora, the main character, has to get a new suit of clothes. And the lengths that he goes to get like a really rich suit of clothes without paying for them is just so fun to read because you just don't think like the way that he goes about doing it, it's just so over the top and it's incredibly intelligent and you're like, wow, like that was awesome. Like good. Like I'm so glad that you figured out a way out of that situation. Like the whole book is that way. There's a bunch of situations that he has to be super smart to get out of. And he's not a physically imposing character, which is really interesting. A lot of fantasy protagonists are like, you know, for lack of a better term, badasses.
And like, I feel like macho.
Right. And Locke is skinny, pretty weak. His best friend is the macho guy.
Okay.
So like there's great character relationships. Him and one of the other main characters, Jean Tannen, is like his muscle, but like it goes back and forth between like the present and then the past, which shows them growing up together and like why they're so tight. And just the character relationships are really, really, really good. And then it's at its heart, it's a heist story. So it,
Okay. Oh, fun.
yeah, there's just a
You
lot
love
of
a
great
good
elements.
heist.
Yeah, it is one of the few perfect fantasy books, I think.
Okay. You know what, Josh? I think you have sold me on this book.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Are you going to read Lies of Locke Lamora?
I think I might.
Oh my goodness.
Then we can do a whole episode on it.
There
No
are
greater joy.
There's no greater joy.
Wow.
I will be so excited
Marriage,
to do an
you
episode
guys.
on Lies
Marriage.
of Locke Lamora. It's one of those that I would love to recommend it to everybody, but it's probably not to everyone's taste.
Okay. Do you think it would be my taste?
I think you would like it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just like in the ways that you're explaining it, I mean, maybe you're just like a really great salesman, but like you're making me want to read it.
Oh, good. I'm glad, because I think you should read it. It's one of those that I think everybody should read. Mm-hmm. If you're going to get into fantasy at all, obviously there's a lot of different shades of fantasy books, but in the traditional like epic fantasy sort of space, everybody thinks to start with like Lord of the Rings or something. And Lord of the Rings is awesome, but it only shows such a narrow view of what fantasy can be.
Can I just tell you my thought on Lord of the Rings right now?
Yeah.
Anytime I hear the Lord of the Rings, I am instantly transported back to the summer of 2020. So we're at the point of COVID where we're all still staying inside, but we can be around our friends, kind of a thing. That's the point we're at in life.
Yeah.
This was literally 1 week before we started dating.
Okay.
And my friends knew that I had never seen any of the Lord of the Rings movies, and all of my friends are really big fans, like diehards, okay?
Yeah.
And so this summer, my friend group literally made me sit down with them and for like a whole consecutive week, watch every single extended version of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And I just remember at the end of each day, we had watched like 7 hours worth of Lord of the Rings.
That sounds about right.
And I just remember being like, I don't even know who I am anymore.
Like your face melted off.
Yeah, honestly. It was a great time.
Yeah.
But it's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot.
Okay, so my number 2.
Yeah.
Or like not in order, but the next one in my stack is ACOTAR. So that stands for A Court of Thorns and Roses, and it is written by Sarah J. Maas. I don't know why I picked this up to read, because I had never read a fantasy book before. Probably
you
picked it up
because of social media.
Well, probably that, but also because every time we go into a bookstore, we gravitate towards your section being fantasy, and then we get to mine either before or after. But we were in the fantasy section of a bookstore how many ever times, and I had seen the covers of this series, and they're so beautiful. They're bright colors. They have this cool graphic of an animal. Yeah, I've got all of them right here behind us. But like, way to go for whoever chose this.
What's the publisher?
I don't know, but it's brilliant because I literally bought this book. 90% of the reason why I bought it was because it caught my eye and it was beautiful. I had seen it all over social media, and I think maybe like a friend that I went to college with had posted about it, and she's kind of like me, a little bit more like girly and not really into like fantasy. So I was like, oh, if she enjoyed it, then maybe I would, kind of a thing, because it was just my first like taste of a fantasy genre. So this book literally changed my life. That's dramatic. That's really dramatic. But now I feel like since reading it, I have a greater appreciation for way more genres than I did previously. Even when it comes to like rom-com books. Before I read this fantasy book, I was hardcore like historical fiction with like a girl main POV, normally having to do with like an heiress or something, or just like general fiction. I had never really.
So you just hadn't gotten into a ton of genre fiction,
right? And so I feel like once I got exposed to this, it really just made me appreciate a lot of other things more. And I think that is my biggest takeaway from this book, is that like I can't have a blind eye towards things that I don't know about. And I just really appreciate just like the artful work that Sarah J. Maas has created, because it is fantasy very clearly. But at the same time, it's like and I guess it's just the world building. And maybe this is how every fantasy novel is, but like she made it feel real.
The good ones, yeah. It's
and
that way.
like, I don't know. I thought like the characters were incredible. And if you read the first book of this series, you absolutely have to read book 2 because of the really, really big twist. Like you have to read book 1 and 2. I mean, the other ones are amazing, but they're more optional. But books 1 and 2 are phenomenal. Just the characters, the struggles, like you were saying, like the challenges that you have to be smart to get yourself out of. It was just, 10 out of 10. Great book.
Yeah.
What's your next one?
All right, this one is probably most favorite of all the favorites. I do think if push comes to shove and I have to pick a favorite book, it's probably going to be Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. It's a big chunky book. I think we're looking at like 1,100 pages.
Yeah, you could kill some big bugs with that book.
It's a door stopper for sure. But I think what makes this book so good is it's really the characters and the struggle. It's just a constant struggle for them to achieve their goals. But again, they're always really intelligent in ways that they overcome obstacles. And it's not just that you get the point of view of the protagonists, you also get the point of view of the antagonists. And
Ooh.
yeah, and you
That's
get like
cool.
really evil, intelligent antagonists in this book. Like they are specifically one who's probably the main antagonist is a despicable human. And the things that he does are like terrible constantly. So like anytime he gets page time, I mean, it's just, I mean, you're on the edge of your seat, I guess, because you just don't know what he's going to do next. And
I'm on the edge of glory, and I'm hanging on over for you. I think in these episodes, we should always make it a challenge for one person to say something and the other person to try and like start singing a song based off those lyrics.
Okay.
Challenge on. I'm 2 for 2 right now. Keep going.
What was the first one?
Hit me with your best shot in our last episode.
Fire away.
Okay, stick to reading, honey.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, keep going. Didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, I don't even know where I was at.
You're on the edge of the seat because the antagonist is horrible.
Oh yeah, and then also there's history wound into.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love historical events woven in. I love it.
Sort of the climax of the whole book is a pretty major historical event. And it starts out where it's in medieval England in like, I don't know, the 1000s, 1100s or something like that. I think it's 1100s. Doesn't matter. And it's about this town building a cathedral. And so it follows these main characters through, I mean, pretty much their entire lives. It's, a good 40-year period of time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you get to like grow with these characters as they get older. And at each stage of life, they sort of have different, I guess, struggles that they're dealing with. And they're just, it's probably the best characters that I've read in a book through the board. I mean, it's like the worst antagonist I can think of. Like when I think of just bad characters, this guy comes to the top of the list. But also the main protagonist is this character named Prior Philip, who's the prior of the cathedral that they're building throughout this book. And he is like the struggle between him wanting, like having his own goals, but also surrendering his goals to God and trying to do what's best for the church collectively and not be selfish, but also like he's incredibly efficient and he sort of runs a really tight ship with the monastery that he runs. And I think he takes great pride in them being like the cleanest and the most efficient with their money, and like just the organizational structure he takes great pride in. But also like there's a ton of moments when he sort of has to surrender his own personal selfish desires, I guess, in order to, surrender to a higher power sort of thing. And this is written by an agnostic. So
Oh, wow.
It's a great representation of like the true ethic of Christianity, at least within this one character, written by somebody who's not a Christian at all, but just like has, I think, an element of reverence for that ethic of living.
Yeah.
But also, one of the main antagonists is another churchman. So it's like a bishop or somebody is one of the main
Yikes.
antagonists. So it's not like there's duality, I think, to every character, and they're so deep, and it is really, really easy to read too, is I guess the other little check in there. But
Yeah, isn't it Ken Follett who said that he never wants to write a sentence that someone has to read twice?
yeah.
I love that about him. Like his aspiration to be so clear and concise and not like overly flowery, and
Yeah, he's
like
not
it
a
just gets to
flowery
the
writer.
point and you don't have to like slow down to process. You just take it in.
Yeah, I mean I guess foundation of all his stories is character and story, and it's not flowery, it's not confusing, but at the end of the day, the characters are just phenomenal.
My next favorite is All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony
Doer?
Doerr.
Door?
Doerr?
The door.
Okay. Well, this has won the Pulitzer Prize, which I don't know how common or rare that is for a book.
Once a year.
Once a year? Wow. So it was the winner of the Pulitzer Prize one year. And I'm not going to lie, I don't remember a whole lot about this book. I read it probably 6 years ago.
Is this a Holocaust book?
It is. I went through a phase of like, in my historical fiction phase, I definitely read like only like Holocaust fiction for a while. I really like to be, I guess, maybe exposed to things like that. I like to get, I guess, I don't know how to explain it. I appreciate the feelings that a good author can evoke by telling a really horrible story that is accurately depicted. And in it, I think more than anything, it just helps me to appreciate how incredibly blessed I am. I think that was one of the main reasons or my main takeaways from reading Holocaust fiction.
Yeah.
But in this book, really the main thing that I remember about it and that has made it stand out to me after all these years as a favorite is the main character is a little kid. And I think it's a girl, but she is blind. And the book doesn't take place. I don't think that's a spoiler. I think that's pretty early on in the book. But the main character is a little girl and she's blind. And the book takes place in her house or in a house. So not at a concentration camp, which is different than a lot of other Holocaust books. And basically it's her struggle to survive and hide and keep herself fed, keep herself hydrated, not knowing what's going on around her. Like there's no one else in the house but her. And she's like 10 or 12 years old and blind and like just literally trying to survive. And I mean, it was just, I think this was the very first book I ever read that actually made me cry, like real tears. It's just so emotional and so beautiful. I will always recommend this book. And then I had one more than Josh, but as we have already made very clear, another one of my top favorite books of all time is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. Michelob Ultra?
Oh
Ew.
my gosh.
That stuff is nasty. Well, basically, if you haven't listened to episode 1,
Yeah, how about this? We'll link the episode
That's
that
smart.
we did
That's good,
on
honey.
Silent Patient. So if you have not read Silent Patient,
now's your chance.
now's your chance. We'll pitch it to you, why it's great. And then once you've read it, go listen to our episode. It'll be in the show notes.
It really, again, and I've said this before in our first episode, but The Silent Patient is my favorite twist of any book I've ever read. I love the a couple of POVs that we get and kind of an unreliable narrator at points. And I just really, really am a big fan of the psychological thriller genre. Like I would totally I really want to read more psychological thrillers. I think the mind is interesting and I think people have like all these complexities to them, and Alex just does like a really great job of portraying trauma from like childhood and how that stems into fruition and beyond in adult life. And again, like nothing will ever compare to the end, like that very last page.
Yeah, that was nuts. Yeah.
I just had like really enthusiastic like body language just then.
You went a little Italian.
I did get a little Italian. If
Chef
you're not
Boyardee.
watching the YouTube video, I'm literally like Chef Boyardee up here.
Ravioli.
Macaroni. What?
Was that macaroni or Michaelides, but like Italian? Macaroni.
It was macaroni.
Macaroni.
Maracos.
Oh, dear Lord. All right, so that'll do it for our favorite books of all time. Our 3, maybe 4, maybe 5-ish.
Yeah, there are definitely some books we left out, but it's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. So check these books out if they intrigued you.
Which they should.
If they didn't, we did a poor job pitching them.
Or you have really bad taste. Honestly. We're the book taste police.
The book
wee
taste
you, wee you.
Oh my gosh. Oh goodness. All right, that'll do it from
Bye.
us. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.